tonight. Thank you. This is the third in our family workshop series for District 25, understanding the kindergarten process, the kindergarten IEP process, the KIP process is the title of today's presentation. My name is Nathan Yakubov. I'm the Administrator of Special Education. And over here, you'll just see my contact information in case anybody needs to reach out to me following the presentation or at any time. I can support you with evaluations for your child, any special education services, any assistive technology questions, as well as any placement questions. So you have my email, my phone number over there. I did develop this presentation with the support of our supervisor of school psychologists, Melissa Monaco. Unfortunately, she's not able to join our evening session tonight, but her contact information is up there as well, and she can also support as she does oversee the clinicians at your schools. Okay, and before we jump in, I just want to mention also that the chat is open. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat, and either I will answer as we're going along or following the presentation. And I will definitely leave some time at the end of the presentation for anybody who wants to speak out and ask any questions or put them in the chat. So we're talking about the kindergarten IEP process. So in New York City, children enter kindergarten in September of the calendar year that they turn 5. Children are guaranteed a kindergarten seat at a public school. Once your child starts kindergarten, they can remain at the same school until its final elementary grade. If your child was born in 2019 and lives in New York City, they are eligible to attend kindergarten in fall of 2024, which will be this September. So let's talk about the kindergarten IEP process, known as the KIP. Families of children with disabilities entering kindergarten in September will take part in the kindergarten IEP process, which is how special education services and supports are determined for children that are entering kindergarten. Now, some of you on this call may already be in this process. You might already be involved in this process, or you might have already gone through this process. So some of this information you may be able to connect to it, and some of this might be brand new for you. This is an ongoing process that's happening right now throughout the city and will continue through the summer. Every elementary school is expected to welcome and service students with disabilities in accordance with their individualized education programs. Families of students with disabilities that enter kindergarten in the fall are encouraged to participate in kindergarten admissions in addition to the kindergarten IEP process. And I'll stop for a second just to clarify that because it is confusing. So if your child has an IEP, you will go through the process that we're going to discuss today. But at the same time, we do encourage all parents to go ahead and register for kindergarten, do the regular kindergarten registration. And hopefully all of you have done that already. And you may get an offer. You will get an offer for that for kindergarten, and it may be most likely, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but most likely will be the same offer that you will get at the end of the kindergarten IEP process. So what is an IEP? All students with disabilities who require special education services have individualized education programs, or IEPs. The IEP contains information about your child's interests, their strengths, their needs, their goals, and the educational program. It is a legal document that describes the plan to provide your child with a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. And those are terms that we are bound to legally by the law to provide to your child, and we will discuss a little bit more of that later on in the presentation. So New York City Public Schools will work with you to consider whether your child needs special education in kindergarten. Regardless, now this is important, it's regardless of whether or not they currently receive preschool special education services. So whether or not your child right now is in preschool and getting special education services or not, they may be going through this process. And if so, they will develop an individualized education program for your child. This is what we call the kindergarten IEP process, or the KIP. and it's vital that you participate. Your participation is very important in this process. If you want more information about kindergarten orientation for students with disabilities, you can email the kindergarten IEP process inbox, and that's the address over here on the screen. So the process does start with a referral. And this process will depend on whether your child already has a preschool IEP. Like I said, some of your student children may have already be getting services right now, and some are not receiving services. If your child does have a preschool IEP, the Committee on Preschool Special Education, CPSE, which you should be familiar with because they've been providing the services up until this point, will refer your child for an evaluation for school-aged special education. So there's nothing for you to do in terms of starting that referral process. If your child does not have a preschool IEP, you may submit a written referral, and New York City Public Schools may also make a referral and notify you. So if your child is, for example, attending a pre-K, and the staff over there feels that it's necessary to make a referral, they may do that and notify you as well. So once the referral is made, we start the IEP process. Your IEP team leader will typically be a school psychologist or a school social worker from a local school or a committee on special education office. Your child's IEP meeting will likely take place at that school or office, although a lot of the meetings nowadays are held virtually. But if it's in person, it will likely be either at the school where that school psychologist works, or it will be at one of the district CSE offices. Keep in mind that having an IEP meeting at a particular school does not mean that your child will be admitted there. It just means that your child's case was assigned to that provider who works at that school, and that's why they're having the meeting for you. One of the team members will reach out to you to explain the process to you, and will share a document called the Prior Written Notice of Recommendation, the PWN. This PWN explains that New York City Public Schools is proposing to conduct a reevaluation, which will determine if your child continues to be eligible for special education services. If it is determined that they are eligible, then they will also determine what services will meet your child's needs for next year in kindergarten. So what does this team do? Once they notify you, the team will also review your child's file, including any evaluations, any progress reports from your current teachers and related service providers. And this will all help the team determine what new assessments, if any assessments, are needed. You'll get a letter letting you know which assessments are needed. And if there are new assessments needed, they will ask you to consent to conduct the assessments. You're going to have to give them permission to conduct those assessments. If new assessments are done, you will get copies of all of the reports before the IEP meeting. Part of the assessments may include an observation of your child in their current preschool classroom. Okay, so usually it may be the social worker or the psychologist that will go to the school and observe your child in that setting. If you have any evaluations, documentation, reports that you want the IEP team to consider, make sure you provide them to the team and they will consider that before the meeting. If you think or feel that your child may need any type of health services, for example, your child has some medical needs or concerns, and you feel that they may need some health services throughout the school day, there are certain medical forms that you will need to have completed by yourself and by your child's doctor. It's important that you have this as soon as possible. So if this is a concern, make sure you request those forms from the team and that you get those filled out. You may also need the forms to be filled out if you feel that there's a need for specialized transportation, which refers to bus service due to a medical need or mobility limitation. Once you completed all those forms, you're going to give it to your KIP representative, whoever is handling the meeting for you. It's important that you provide these forms as early as possible so the IEP team can review the forms before the IEP meeting. You may also need to give updated forms to the school before school starts in September. And just to mention again, it's important to get this done as soon as possible because a lot of times there needs to be some a greater review when it comes to these kinds of issues. It may entail our Office of Health reaching out to your child's doctor with your permission to discuss and to get more information. So it's vital that you provide this information, these forms, as soon as possible. So we've spoken about the referral. We've spoken about the IEP team and what information they're going to be gathering. Once they've conducted the review and possibly any assessments, we come to the point of the kindergarten IEP meeting. You'll get a letter with the date, the time, and the location of your child's meeting at least 5 days before the meeting. At this meeting, the team will determine whether your child is eligible for special education in kindergarten. And we'll talk about that on the next slide. If your child is eligible, the IEP team, which you are part of, will develop an IEP for kindergarten. You are a very important member of the IEP team as the parent or the guardian, but there may be other participants who will participate either in person or over the phone. And that might include your child's teacher and or related service provider. So even if your child is not attending a New York City public school pre-K, their teacher, if they're in some kind of a daycare or some kind of pre-K program, your teacher can participate and your therapist can participate as well. And related services providers like occupational therapists or speech therapists. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to schedule, but every effort will be made to accommodate that. A school psychologist will participate, and others with knowledge about your child or who have special expertise. Like we said before, most IEP meetings will be held at your zoned elementary school if you have one. If the KIP representative leading the meeting does not work at your elementary school, your zoned elementary school, then we may also invite a professional from the zoned school to participate in the meeting as well. If your child has received an offer to another school for kindergarten, let the KIP representative know this before the meeting, and they may request a professional from that school to attend the meeting as well, so that they're aware of the meeting and the recommendation that's made. Now we spoke about eligibility, so we're going to dive into that a little bit. At the IEP meeting, the IEP team will first discuss whether your child is eligible for school-age special education. And now, even if your child was already receiving preschool special education services, there is a different standard for school-age special education. To be eligible, your child must meet the criteria of one of the 13 disability classifications. The disability classification will be listed on your child's IEP. So if you're a parent of a child who's receiving preschool special education services right now, then you know that your child is classified as a preschool student with a disability. That will change for kindergarten, and they will receive one of the classifications. If your child has a preschool IEP, but the IEP team finds that your child is no longer eligible for special education in kindergarten, then your child will be declassified from special education services. That means they're going to go to a general education classroom for kindergarten. Even though they're going to general education, the team might recommend declassification support services for your child's first year without special education. And what that means is that even though your child is no longer getting special education services and they're sitting in a general education classroom, they may get some accommodations or some additional support instructionally, or maybe even some related services such as speech therapy or counseling, depending on what the team feels that your child may need just for that 1 year of transition, because they've just ended their services and now they're moving into a place where they're not getting the services anymore. So we mentioned the 13 disability classifications. Again, for any child to receive services for school-age special education, they need to be eligible and fall into one of these categories of disability classifications. So you can see them on the screen. You have autism, deafblindness, deafness, emotional disturbance, hearing impairment, learning disability, intellectual disability, multiple disabilities, orthopedic impairment, other health impairment, speech or language impairment, traumatic brain injury, or visual impairment, which might include blindness. Some of these you may be familiar with the terms. Some of them might be more elusive. We did have a presentation a few months ago on all of these classifications, and they are on our website. If anybody is interested in reviewing those, if you need any more information on those, and of course, you can always reach out to find out more information about any of these specific classifications. Just it's important to note that some of these would require a diagnosis or documentation from a medical doctor in order for your child to be eligible. So how do we determine if they're eligible? The IEP team determines whether or not the student is eligible for special education. And as you can see on the screen, we have the two sides. If your child is eligible, that means that they meet the criteria for one of those 13 disability classifications, which we mentioned, and they require a special education program by reason of at least one of his or her disabilities. So it's not just enough that they have that disability classification. We'll use autism as an example, but we need to have evidence that because they have the autism now, they need a special education program in order to gain access to their learning at their school. The student would not be eligible if they do not meet one of the 13 criteria, or they do meet one of the 13 criteria, but they're making progress that's anticipated based on their individual strengths and abilities. Or the determining factor of them not meeting or not making progress is due to either a lack of instruction, of appropriate instruction, or limited English proficiency. So what that means is, let's say your child was never exposed to school. Your child had never been in a formal education program, or your child was not in a suitable educational program. And now, because of that, they have not made the anticipated progress, but your child does have the capabilities based on the testing, they would not be eligible for special education. Or let's say your child has limited English proficiency. And we would know this through the testing. And the only reason they cannot perform to the standards is because of their limited English. They would not qualify for special education either. So on this slide, I just put a disclaimer, like a caution sign. It's important to understand that although your child may have one of the criteria for the disability classifications that we spoke about, the 13 classifications, they may not necessarily require a special education program or a related service. So for example, a student who meets the criteria for other health impairment might be receiving medication that allows them to participate and to progress in the general education setting. In that case, we would not recommend special education for that child because they are able, with their medication, to participate and to progress. Furthermore, a student who is struggling in school or with homework should be considered for special education if it's impacting their ability to learn and progress, and they have been provided with appropriate learning experiences and instruction. So like I said before, we want to make sure that they've had the opportunity. Have they been in a classroom? Have they been in a school setting? If they've had all that and yet they still need the support, we would consider special education. And it's also important to know that any student, even a student who's in a gifted and talented program or any other enrichment or accelerated program, or a child that's moving from grade to grade, can still be eligible to receive special education services if that is necessary. So like we said before, the Individualized Education Program, the IEP, is a written statement of our plan to provide your child with free and appropriate public education in their least restrictive environment. And what that means is that your child will be in a school and a classroom with non-disabled peers for as much of the day as appropriate. We are legally bound to make sure that that is occurring for your child. There's an array of services available to support your child in his or her least restrictive environment. So as you see all these different settings with the blue arrow going up and down, this is what we call the continuum of services. And it's a continuum. There's no beginning or end. It can go, it's a flow, depending on the needs of the student. And we can go from what's the least restrictive, which is general education, where the student is not receiving any special education, right? To the next level where they're receiving some support with, let's say, speech therapy or occupational therapy. If a student would need more support, then we might provide them with a special education teacher support services, also known as SETS. And that's a teacher who works either one-on-one or in a small group with your child while your child attends a general education classroom, and they are generally pulled out of that classroom for a period or a few periods a week, and the teacher will work with them. If a child needs more support, we would consider integrated co-teaching. And that's a regular size classroom where you have actually two teachers. One is a general education teacher and one is a special education teacher. And in that classroom, you would have no more than 12 students with IEPs who are receiving special education. And this way, they have exposure to a regular classroom, to the general education students, but at the same time, they get the support that they need from the special education teacher as well. If that's not enough for a student and they need more support, we would recommend a special class, and that would be a small class of no more than 12 students, where every student in that class has an IEP, and the teacher is working with all of them on their individual special education needs. If a child needs something more restrictive, they need more support, we may recommend District 75, one of our District 75 specialized programs, which is a school where all students in that school are receiving special education services. So the level of support would definitely be higher than one of our regular community public schools. If a child needs more than that, we may recommend a day in residential placement. And this could either be a part-time placement or a full-time residential placement where the student is really receiving maximum support because they cannot function in a community setting. And finally on the list, we have home and hospital instruction. This may be due to a medical condition where a child cannot attend a community school, so they would be receiving services outside of the school, either at home or in the hospital setting. And like I said before, it's important to note, there's no one setting for one student. It really depends on where the child is at this time and what services and supports we need to implement for them. And whatever the plan is, this will be clearly documented on your child's IEP. So let's talk for a second about creating that individualized plan. Like we said, it will say the classification disability on the plan. And it'll also note the program, the setting that we're recommending, and any services. If your child is eligible for school-age special education, the team will create an individualized education program for your child. And the IEP will include information about your child's strengths, their interests, their unique needs. The team will also set goals based on your child's abilities and their needs. And the team will describe in the document what skills your child will work on in kindergarten. They will then decide what supports and services your child would need to reach those goals. After the meeting, a copy of the IEP will be given to you or mailed to you within approximately 2 weeks after the meeting. On the other hand, we have what's called a kindergarten IESP. And this is in the case where your child will be attending kindergarten at a private or religious school in New York City. They still may be eligible to receive special education services and or related services that are provided by the New York City Public Schools. If you do decide to send your child to a private or religious school at your expense, let your KIPP representative know that you're seeking special education at that school. If you make the request and your child is eligible for those services, then the team will develop what's called an IESP instead of an IEP. The IESP is an individualized education services plan. And similar to the IEP, it will describe the services that will be provided to your child while they're attending the private or religious school. You will need to provide the name and the address of the private or religious school that your child will be attending in order for the team to develop the IESP. Usually what I tell parents is to get a letter of acceptance from the school and just provide a copy to the team so that they're aware of which school your child will be going to. If your plans change at any time, let your KIPP representative know. So for example, if an IESP has been developed for your child, because you had originally thought that you would be sending your child to private school, and now you'd like to send your child to public school, you need to request a new IEP meeting. And you want to make sure you do this before your child starts school. So contact your KIPP representative or the district CSE office to do so. Also, if your child will attend a school outside of New York City, tell your KIPP representative. They will provide you with contact information for the school district where the school is located. That school district would work with you to develop a plan and a program to provide any recommended services. New York City cannot provide an IEP or services for your child if they're attending a school outside of our district. So it's important for you to let the representative know where you either be moving to or if your child will be attending that school, and they will help you to get in contact with that school district. So we've spoken about the process really from beginning to end in terms of developing the IEP for your child for kindergarten. Starting in May, you may receive a green notice in the mail. This is the school location letter. And this letter will list your child's recommended special education services, as well as the school that will provide these services. And you can take that letter, go to the school, and register at that school. Most children with IEPs receive special education services in the same school they would go to if they did not have IEPs. So for example, if you live down the block from PS10, and that's the school that you would have sent your child to for kindergarten, and now that your child has an IEP, you will most likely get a letter recommending those services to be provided at PS10. So if you apply to kindergarten prior to this, then the recommended services will most likely be provided in that school where your child gets that kindergarten offer. And you'll likely get those two letters with the same school offer. If you didn't apply to kindergarten, then the services will most likely be provided in a school in your home district. Okay, so this sometimes is confusing for parents because they'll get a letter with a school that they maybe did not apply for, or a school that they're maybe not so familiar with, and the reason might be because that school will be prepared to provide the services. And if you have any questions when you receive those letters, I encourage you either to reach out to the school or reach out to myself or our district office for any support with that. There are some special situations when it comes to school placement. So for example, if your child's IEP recommends a District 75 school, which we spoke about before, your child will receive a placement in a specialized school. So you'll get a letter letting you know the name and the address of that school where your child can get those services. If your child's IEP recommends a state-approved or state-supported non-public school, this is for our children, again, who are most severely delayed, then the school where your child was accepted will provide those recommended services. If your child is accepted into a specialized program, such as our ASD programs for children with autism or ACEs, your child will receive a placement to a school that can provide that program. And so you'll get a letter with that school information on it. Or if your child requires an accessible school, your child will be offered a placement in such a school. So for example, if your child, let's say, is wheelchair bound and they need accessibility to be able to get into the school, you will be offered a school that has that availability. I forgot to put on the slide that also, if your child is recommended for a bilingual program, which we do have in our district as well, if your child is recommended for a specialized bilingual program, you will also receive a letter with the specific school that can provide that program in September. If the school that's listed in the letter that you received did not take part in your IEP meeting, the staff at your new school may invite you to a family meeting. And at the family meeting, you can visit the school, look over the IEP together with the school staff, share in any information that you think the school staff should know about your child that's going to be going to their school, and also ask any questions you might have about how they're going to provide the services that are on the IEP. If you would like to visit the school or have a family meeting, you can always contact the school's parent coordinator or the principal. Explain to them that you have a letter and that your child will be attending that school, but they did not participate in the meeting, and therefore you would like some time to meet with them. You can also let the school know if you'd like to talk over the phone instead, or if you're not interested in meeting prior to school starting. Okay, I just want to mention as well that as we have today at our meeting, interpreter services, you can always request interpreter services at any of your child's IEP meetings or any school meeting that you might have. And that's for another language, and that can be for sign language as well, if that's necessary. And it could be over the phone or it could be in person. In addition, you can also have translations of any IEP documents, assessments, or notices provided to you as well before or after a meeting. That usually takes a little bit more time, so you need to let the school know as soon as you can that you need that, and they will request that, and we can have those documents translated for you. You do have, as a parent or guardian, the right to challenge any school decisions made regarding your child. You can request mediation or an impartial hearing when you have any disagreements or you want to challenge any decisions. Mediation is a situation where there's an outside person, a mediator, that helps you and the school work out any disagreements you might have about your child's education plan. An impartial hearing is a little bit different. Over there, you'll have an actual hearing officer who listens to both sides of the disagreement, and then he or she decides what, if anything, went wrong and what should be the way to fix it. So if you need to request this, you can always submit your request to the email inboxes over here. There's two inboxes, or you can always submit it to the district office or to your school. And I just see somebody's putting in the chat for Spanish. I think they need the information for the Spanish.
I got it.
Thank you. Well, actually, we're really at the end of our presentation, and I wanted to open it up for any questions. We spoke a lot about the process for your child moving to kindergarten and determining if they will be eligible for special education services, and if they are eligible, how to develop that plan and what that will look like in terms of an IEP, as well as a school location letter. So if you do have any questions, please put them in the chat, and I will read them out loud and answer them. If you'd like, Lewis will give everybody the ability to unmute, and then you can just unmute and speak out your question as well, and we'll answer that. And in the meantime, I just want to mention also that we have our District 25 information, contact information on the screen, our website, our email, phone, and address. And like I mentioned, we do have the prior workshops that were presented about the IEP, about the classifications. Those can all be found on our website, as well as today's recording will also be put on the website if you need to go back and review this or share with anybody. So that's our information over there. So let's go ahead and I'll give you a few minutes if anybody has any questions.
Any questions from the interpreters?
There's no questions on the Mandarin side.
There's no questions on the Spanish side.
Thank you. I arrived late to the meeting. Somebody's saying, my apologies. That's no problem. The meeting was recorded and it will be on our district website if you need to access that. And of course, if you have any questions now, that you can go ahead and feel free to ask.
So someone messaged me a question in Spanish. I'm gonna put it back in the chat so that our
Okay.
Spanish interpreter can read it.
Okay. And I see we have a question for now
From
in
David, right?
English from David. Are we waiting for a letter or phone call, or do we
Tenemos,
make first contact? So just let me answer that question first. And well, it depends. If your child is already receiving preschool special education services, then you don't have to make first contact. you will be contacted either through letter or phone call. It does sometimes take longer than other. The process has started, but this is an ongoing process. So if your child's already receiving services, there's nothing for you to do to start that process. If your child is not receiving any services and you are concerned, then you do need to put your concerns in writing. If your child's attending a pre-K, you can hand it to the school over there, or you can send it to the CSE office. I'll put my contact information. So if if the particular question about that, if you need more information, you can reach out to me with more particulars so I can get more specific with you. But again, if your child is already receiving services at preschool, there's nothing for you to do. Okay, I see he's already receiving services, so great. So you will be contacted for that, yeah. Okay, and we have the question in Spanish from Stephanie.
The question reads as follows. From Stephanie, I have a question. My daughter has 2 years old and she's receiving IEP and she is in kindergarten, but I don't see any advancement. I don't see her kind of like moving forward.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. She, if I understood correctly, she's still 2 years old, so she's not yet moving to kindergarten, but she does have time to continue with her preschool special education services. And so anytime you have any questions about that or are concerned with that progress, you can speak to your providers and let them know your concerns, and they can possibly reopen the case and look to see if there's any more services that are needed or any changes that need to be made. You should be
Feel
also
like,
have,
Nathan, I feel like the statement was that the child has had an IEP since they were 2, and now they're in
uh,
kindergarten. Was that
Oh, you are correct.
can we
Let
cut?
me just
Yeah.
reiterate that one more
Yeah.
time. So from Stephanie, I have a question. My daughter has been receiving IEP services for about 2 years and she's in kindergarten,
now? Right.
but I do not see any advancement or any, I guess, her development.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So then I guess they're transitioning now to kindergarten, and you're concerned that you're not seeing any advancements with their services. So that is something that you should be bringing up at the meeting that you're going to be having with the team, so that they can better develop the best services for her or him for kindergarten. Uh, I would say that we do need to understand and give it a chance that your child now will be moving to a different setting. It's a different types of services, and it's a different level of services. So you just want to make sure that you share as the parent with the team what you feel was working and what wasn't working, because sometimes they're just getting a small glimpse of your child. So they may recommend something based on what your child has already been receiving. And if you feel that that hasn't been helpful, then you should let them know and let them know why it hasn't been helpful and what else they can offer you. And then we have another question in Spanish from Yemi.
From Jamie, what is the time? 1 second. For how long, I guess what they're trying to ask is for how long a kid can receive an IEP service.
Okay, so students can receive IEP services as long as they continue to be eligible. They can receive it until they turn 21 years old, until the year after they turn 21 years old, actually. So this can follow them throughout all of their schooling as needed. But again, they would have to, continue to qualify for that, and there would have to there would have to be a need for that. But there's no cutoff in terms of that. The services run from age 5 to 21. We have a question from Angelina in the chat. My daughter has been receiving services. She's doing really good, improving. She will be doing speech therapy at kindergarten as well. Thanks. Great, Angelina. Thanks. Good to hear. And hopefully, if you haven't had your meeting yet, you'll have that meeting. Or if you had it already and they recommended the speech therapy, just continue to follow up with the school and let them know also what was worked with her in the past, so that she can continue to make that progress in the new setting.
These were all really good questions. Any more? Any more questions, anyone?
In the interpreter rooms or in the chat? Anybody? How about summertime, David is asking?
Good question. We were just
That's a
talking
good
about that
question,
today.
yeah. So as your child is transitioning from preschool to kindergarten, if they are eligible for summer services, that will be determined by the CPSE. So the ones that are overseeing their services now, they would make a recommendation of whether or not this summer your child should receive services or not. That really does not have any impact on your kindergarten recommendation. And the kindergarten team will have to determine that for next year, if for 2025, if your child would still be eligible for summer services. I should say that the majority of students do not qualify for what we call extended school year services. That's the summer services. Most students go to school from September to June. Even IEP students, they get their services, they take a break, and then they come back. We do have 6 weeks in the summer that can be recommended for those students with significant delays that we are worried that they will regress over the summer significantly, and that they would be recommended for that. But that is generally not done at an initial kindergarten meeting. That would happen later on in the year as the school gets to know your child and they see the rate of progress and how the student is doing. And if they have concerns, they may recommend that for next year. iPhone says my daughter had EI, early intervention, and graduated for kindergarten. However, I see her struggling. How can I reopen her case? That's a really good question. So if your child is currently in kindergarten already, then you would put your request in writing and present it to your school. You can give that to the school principal or assistant principal or the school psychologist at your school if they're attending in New York City public school. If your child is not yet in kindergarten or they're not attending a public school, they're attending, let's say, a private or parochial school, then you would present that letter, the referral, to your local committee on special education, and you can reach out to me for that contact as well. Really good questions. Thank you, everyone. Okay,
I got
there's
one more
another one.
in Spanish.
So the question in Spanish reads from Jamie: when a kid is receiving an IEP for pronunciation, and do they receive that kind of IEP service for pronunciation on a regular class, or do they have to have a special class
I guess that's like
with
speech
less
therapy.
kids? I guess it's speech therapy.
Speech
Yeah.
therapy, yeah.
Thank you. That's a good question. And it's going to really depend on the needs of the child. So we do have students that can attend a general education classroom and still get speech therapy. And then there are students that do need extra support. So they'll be in a special class and also get speech therapy. So this would all be documented on the IEP. It's something the team would determine with you together, but a child does not have to be in a special class in order to get speech therapy. Okay, any other questions? Again, feel free to unmute also if you'd like to just call out a question.
All right, like Nathan said earlier, this meeting has been recorded, as was the meeting this morning that took place at 11 a.m. And we'll be putting them on YouTube, and I will be emailing all the families that registered for this event with that YouTube link again, so that you can refer to it if you joined late or you were not able to join at all. That recording will be made available along with the slides that Nathan used for the presentation. Are there any other questions before we wrap it up today?
Thanks, Louis. So I guess I'll stay on for another 2-3 minutes. If you don't have questions, you're free to go. If anybody comes up with something in the next 2-3 minutes, I'll stay on. But otherwise, thank you everybody for joining and have a great night.